Shalom Aleichem. If one wants to enter his car on Shabbat Kodesh, of course, if the lights turn on in the car when you open the door, you're not allowed to enter such a car. But if you have a car that doesn't turn on the lights when you enter the door, then the halakha permits entering the car. Or if a person knows he would need to sit in his car during Shabbat, or he feels that he might want to have something in the car to take out, or he wants to store something in a car during Shabbat, if he knows that before Shabbat, then he could dismantle the lights either by going to the battery and taking off the wire. Not so simple, but if one knows how to do that, then when he opens the door of the car, nothing turns on, and that is a permissible way of going into the car on Shabbat, putting things in there, taking out things from there. If you want to sit and relax in a car, the poskim permit doing such a thing. We found this by the name of Moshe Feinstein that was permitting it. We found in Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata from Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that permits it. We found also in Yalkut Yosef that brings from his father, Chacham Ovadia, that permits it. Even if you hold that the car is muktzeh, but it's such a muktzeh that's called Kli shemelachto leisur, which means it's a muktzeh that one is permitted to handle, to move for gufo umekomo. If you need it, you need to use it in a permissible way, or if you need to move it away from wherever it is, because you need that space. In a car, when you want to open the door, you're entering in order to sit inside, so that's called the tzorch gufo, that's permitted. The question is about marit ayin. It doesn't look good. People think that it's davar ha'asur, and therefore all the poskim I mentioned before say that one should be careful not to do this in front of people. So if you have it in a place that there's people walking by, of course one needs to stay away from doing such a thing. The Or Letzion even writes that it might look like you're going to take a ride in a car, which is also not permitted, and therefore one needs to make sure that he enters a car where there's no people around, whether it's in a backyard where nobody could see it, or he lives in a place that he doesn't have people walking by. He has it, let's say, in the back of his house also, where nobody sees. In such scenarios, one is allowed to enter the car. What about closing the door of the car? That's already more problematic, because you're closing the door to protect what's inside. It's considered something that's not letzorch gufo umekomo. It's considered mechama letzel. You're just trying to save things that are inside. So therefore, the idea over here and the suggestion that Chacham Ovadia gave was that you should have something in there that you might need, and therefore, let's say you're putting food in there, so in order to protect that food so you can eat it later on without, let's say, insects coming in, cats and dogs walking in, or whatever it is, so therefore such a thing would be permitted. It's called like a arama, like you manipulating something over here in order that the door should be able to be closed. According to the Or Letzion, car is a more strict muktzeh. The Or Letzion write that it's muktzeh mechamat chesron kis, which is a very extreme muktzeh that one wouldn't be able to move it in any possible way. But he's mechadesh, he says an insight that as long as you are handling part of the muktzeh and not the entire muktzeh, it's permitted to move it. He brings that from the fact that the Shulchan Aruch permits using the tail of the horse. The tail of the horse, if you need it, let's say to wipe your mouth or so on, that's what they did in their times. The Shulchan Aruch permits using it. So the Or Letzion asks, but 1 minute, a horse and any animal is muktzeh, so how can you handle the tail of the horse? The Biur Halacha says that we're talking about tail that is not anymore attached to the horse, it's detached from the horse. But the Or Letzion writes that it's not the mashmon. It doesn't sound like that's what the Shulchan Aruch is saying, because it seems simply that we're talking about tail that is still connected to the horse. That's the words of the Shulchan Aruch. So therefore, he says that the idea over here that it's permitted is because you're not moving the entire horse, just a small part of that horse, and only the tail, so therefore it's permitted. He learns from that one that wants to handle part of the muktzeh, a minor part of the muktzeh, then he's allowed to do so. So that therefore he says that one is allowed to open the car door, sit inside, or put things inside, take out. All this is fine because the door is not muktzeh, although the entire car is muktzeh, but handling just the door would be permitted. What about the keys? How could you take a key on Shabbat? So it depends what kind of key you have. If it's a simple hard key that you take it, that's used for opening the door, then you have no problem because it's kli shemelachto le'eter. Since you're allowed to enter the car, you're allowed to handle the keys as well. It's not muktzeh. But sometimes that key is used for the opening of the door and to ignite the car as well to start the car. Still, that's permitted because it's considered le'eter ve'le'isur. Any muktzeh that's for heter and isur, for permissible use and unpermissible, you're allowed to use. This is the halacha. But many of the keys today are not such hard keys like they used to be, but rather it's all with buttons, electric. You just started by pressing buttons, and it's a very fancy piece that is used to opening the door, the trunk, start the ignition, if you don't know where your car is, so you call it, and it has an alarm with it. Such a thing, it's a high level of muktzeh, mechamat resron kis, because a person handles this with care. It's very, very expensive. You lose it, it costs you hundreds of dollars to replace such a thing. So such a thing is definitely muktzeh, and one is not allowed to touch this, to move it on Shabbat. Also, one is afraid to lose it. If he loses that key, he can't enter the car, he can't start the car. So therefore, because of all those reasons, it's muktzeh mechamat chesron kis. One is not allowed to handle this on Shabbat. If he really needs to enter the car for any given reason that's important, he's forgot something there that's very important, or he needs to put something in there, something important, then he can ask a goy to enter the car for him. This would be even if the light turned on, because it's called psik reisha. The goy doesn't intend to turn on the light when he opens the door. We're not allowed to do it because anything we don't intend, but you opening the door and the light starts, then it's considered psik reisha. Psik reisha, it's inevitable that it's going to happen. Such a thing is not permitted on Shabbat. But by a goy, psik reisha is permitted, since that's not his intention to open the light of the car. He only wants to open the door to help us out. Therefore, such a thing was permitted by a goy. This is brought down a few times in the Shulchan Aruch. The Rama brings down in Resh Nun Gimel, for example, that at their time when there was a goya, a shifcha, a cleaning lady, a maid that's not Jewish, that would turn on the heat on Shabbat because it was very cold. So that's permitted if she needs to turn on the heat in the house. She would go to Bet HaChoref, to the boiler, turn it on because it was very cold on Shabbat. That would be permitted. But what about if there would be on top of the boiler, on top of the tanur, there would be a pot of food or drink, and she's now cooking it? That's not permitted, because cooking on Shabbat, you're not allowed to ask a goy to do it for you. And it's for you, definitely not allowed. But over here, says the Rama, that since that wasn't your intention, her intention was to turn on the heat in the house in a permissible way, in a very cold day, and the food got cooked, by the way, without her intention, it is permitted, because psik reisha with a goy is permitted. There's other places as well. For instance, we found that a goy is allowed to swipe the floor and clean the floor, although it's mashve gumot, by the unpaved house where they didn't have any floor, but it was a ground. When she does that, she makes the floor straight, which is not permitted on Shabbat. But since that's not the intention is just to clean the floor. For a Jew, is not allowed because it's psik reisha. By a goy, it is permitted. Over here as well, when he opens the door and the light turns on, that is permitted. There are those that are machmir on that. The Shlomo Zalman was machmir on such a thing, but the other poskim permitted doing, because, as I explained, it is psik reisha. But that is only true when you're opening such a door with the key. But if the only way to open the door is by pressing the buttons, then that is the way to, that's not a permissible way to do things. That's what he wants to do. He wants to press the button in order for it to open. If there's another way to open, let's say there's a way to open it with the button and also with a hard key, so then he can open it however he wants because he does it for his own benefit. As far as we're concerned, he should use the hard key, but for his benefit, it's easier for him to use the button. So that's permitted whenever a goy does something for us that's possible to do in a permissible way without violating the Shabbat. And he does it in a way that's not permitted on Shabbat. He does it for his own way, for his own purpose, for his own benefit, since it's easier for him. It's called avida data de nafshe. He does it with his own mind. We don't have to stop him from doing it. He does it for himself. Like for instance, if let's say we have a cleaning lady on Shabbat and she needs to clean the dishes, normally we would clean it with cold water, but she turns on the hot water and the boiler starts working downstairs, and the water's being cooked every second by the cold water. But she does it for her own benefit because she could have cleaned with cold water, and she decided to use hot water. Such a thing is not something that we have to stop him from doing. So therefore, opening the door with when you have a possibility to open it with a hard key, he can do it however he wants. But if there's no such thing, it's only with buttons, then it's problematic. You're dealing now with a question of doing a melacha that, according to many, is deoraita, because using electricity, whether it's battery operated, whatever it is, most of the poskim hold it is deoraita. This is how Moshe held. This is how the Shevet HaLevi held. Of Eliashiv, Chazon Ish definitely, even Chacham Ovadia writes that way, that la halacha we hold that electricity and any type of electricity, batteries, whatever it is all deoraita, and therefore you don't have over here shvut the shvut. It's one shvut. A goy doing it is the Rabbanan, but he's doing something that's deoraita according to most poskim. Therefore, one should not ask a goy to do that. If it is indeed extremely important to open the door, let's say a scenario like that you need over there something that's very important. Let's say there's Tylenol in a car and you have a kid that needs it. So then you're definitely allowed to ask a goy. Why? Because then we rely on the poskim that hold that it is the Rabbanan to use the button to open the door. There are poskim that hold that way. It's a big machloket. And also when you need Tylenol in the example that I gave, there's other reasons as well to permit, because Tylenol is considered a chole. For chole, you're allowed to ask a goy to do things for you. So the example I gave is not precise, because again, there's a reason to permit even without the first reason, because it's Tylenol for a kid that needs it. But in other scenarios that it's not that important, or it's not for a sick person, and definitely not a kid, that's it. So then you'll be able to rely on what we said before and open the door through a goy.